Folks, welcome into a Level Deeper podcast. I'm going off script for this intro today, and I'm doing that because you'll find it's very fitting for this conversation that you're about to listen to. My guest today is Julie Booksh, and Julie is a traditionally trained psychotherapist, and she worked in a private practice for many years. And what I loved about the beginning of our conversation is that we talked all about this idea of going off script, where there's this script that we often feel like has been written by society or the people in our lives about how we are supposed to go about our own life and the things that we're supposed to do and the decisions that we're supposed to make. And then maybe we choose to go off script.
I was following the script. You go to school, you follow the curriculum, you get out of school, you get married. I was following the script. And I was in the script and found out that I wasn't very happy.
And so naturally, when you think about this idea of going off the script and starting to write your own script, you think about, well, what does that feel like?
I would say liberating and terrifying at the same time.
I love Julie's answer because it felt honest, it felt sincere, it felt raw. And from my experience, that's exactly what happens when you go off script and you start to write a script of your own and you start to create the life that you want to create. This whole idea of going off script was really only the beginning of this conversation. As we went on, we talked about the power of emotions and the ways in which we're sort of mishandling or mistaught how to handle our emotions. We're taught that we need things like anger management. And then we have a conversation about, well, what about happiness management or joy management? We talked about some of the downsides of if we don't turn towards some of these emotions and explore them and be curious, how that impacts and shows up in our lives and in our bodies. And then we had some fun conversation about why don't these things get taught to people? Why do we have to go through so much of our lives without learning about these concepts, about learning about how to handle and process and deal with our emotions? And it just feels like it's important. Anyway, I had a great time during this conversation. I think you're really going to enjoy Julie. So please sit back, relax, and here's my conversation with Julie Booksh. My approach to my interviews is that I try to rely on some of my natural curiosity and listening. So I'd be lying if I say that I do hours and hours of prep going into my conversations, but I popped on your website for a moment and something immediately stood out to me. You had a line on there that, as you were describing the ways in which you help people in your current work, and we'll dive more into that later, you used the line, I help people cut through BS that labels, minimizes, reduces, or traps you. And when I read that, I just kind of thought to myself, A, those are some pretty like strong words, which I like that from a communication standpoint. And B, that to me indicates maybe some previous experiences in your life that have led you to those beliefs. Can you tell us a little bit about that line and the ways in which you help people cut through what you've labeled as BS? Why that term?
Oh, well, okay, where do I begin? Let me tell you a little bit about my story, and then maybe we can go from there. So a lot of people ask me, I used to be an accountant, first of all. And people say, an accountant to a therapist? How in the world did you do that? That's like so polar opposite. And I was 24 years old, and I was in a marriage that I did not know that I wanted to be in. And so that was the very first time I ever thought about going to talk to a therapist. And I did. Now, here's where we get into, I was following the script. You go to school, you follow the curriculum, you get out of school, you get married. I was following the script. And I was in the script and found out that I wasn't very happy. So I go to see this therapist. I end up leaving that marriage, which was a big script breaker because I grew up in a strict Catholic family and a strict Catholic community. And so I was breaking all sorts of scripts in a way. Well, I did leave that marriage, and that experience led me to questioning everything. Like once I started to question that, I started to question, why am I in the job that I am in? Why do I choose the relationships that I'm in? do I believe the religious teachings that I was taught? And if I don't, what do I believe? So all of that set me off on a really deep journey of self-discovery, which will never end for me. But that was the beginning of it. And so after about 5 years of lots of discovery, working as an accountant by day, devouring books on spiritual and personal growth at night and on the weekends, I started to think about a career change. And I couldn't figure out, how am I going to like stop this career and start that career? What if I don't like it, all these things? And one day my therapist said to me, well, why don't you just go take a night class? And I said, oh, well, right. I can just go take a class or two. And if I don't like it, I'm done. So I did go take a night class and I loved it. And after the first week of class, I was still living in New Orleans at the time. Hurricane Katrina hit. The whole semester was canceled. So I'm like, I finally decide, because that was all about me, right? I finally decide to do this. And maybe I am making the wrong choice. And I'm like, okay, this whole hurricane didn't happen because you're making the wrong choice. But once I started seeing the real devastation that unfolded with that whole experience, it was clear to me where my calling was pulling me even, I got more validation, if anything. It was, I want to help people. I want to help people with their pain and with their struggles. So that's like a little bit of the story of how I even got into this profession. That tells you a little bit about my thoughts on the BS, that you have to follow a certain order in life in order to be successful, in order to be happy, and that somebody else has it all written for you, the way to do it. And we see that everywhere. We see it everywhere.
Okay, so tell me more about this idea of this script or this order. Specifically, I'm curious about, who was or what do you feel like was writing this script that you felt like you had to follow? And this is an experience that I share in my life as well. So I can resonate with what you're saying. I think it's interesting to reflect on. Yeah, where is this script coming from?
That's a great question, because when I think about it, my parents did not want me to marry my first husband. So it wasn't like, you need to do this. But I was living at home, and in my mind, the only way to be independent was to get married. Like, I never thought like you could just move out and live by yourself. So there's a cultural script. And when I look back, I think to myself, yeah, why did I think that? But because that's the way my sister did it. That's the way I saw lots of people do it. That's what you did. I didn't know how else to launch myself independently. And maybe there's a little bit of sexism in that whole thing too, that, a woman's independence has something to do with who she marries or something. I never really thought about this. But so it wasn't my parents, because they were against it. They supported it, but they made it clear that this was not what they saw for me. So there was that. As far as getting married, I think the scripts come from everywhere. It comes from the people we watch in our lives, and we think, oh, that person seems happy, or that person seems like they have it together. And so that's what you must do. And for young women, I think so much of our identity is wrapped up in who we are with or who chooses us. Now, I'm dating myself. This was over 20 years ago. I'm hoping that things have changed for young women. So I think that's part of the script. I don't know if religious culture was in that. I think was in that in the sense of maybe some of the sexism involved, but it's not like religious culture was saying you need to get married now. But I think they're all sort of tied together.
And so then somewhere along the line, you made a conscious decision to start breaking the script or going against the script. What was it that was happening? Tell us more about you mentioned, you were having some of this longing of wanting to maybe pursue something different. I'm always curious, and like, can you tell us more about what were some of the things that brought you to this realization, or that pulled you to say, what, I've had enough of what I feel like is this script, and I'm going to go write my own.
Yeah, it's still a struggle sometimes, because I don't want to speak for other people. I don't always realize the stories that are playing in my head. They're just so part of us and everywhere we go that we don't even realize we're telling ourselves a story that isn't necessarily true. But for me, the process of seeing a therapist at that time who would I learned that it was okay to think for myself. I learned that it was okay to have my own responses, even if other people disagreed with my responses. Again, I'm still learning that in much deeper ways as I evolve. I think it's a lifelong process for many of us. The validation that it's okay that you don't want this. It's okay that you want something different. It's okay that you feel this way. It's okay that you're having these reactions. It's okay that you're angry, even, which I don't know if I was real angry then, but our feelings are okay. And they're not things that should be shoved back into some order. They are things that guide us. Our feelings guide us. And so when I look back, I think the initial opening of the door that said, Julie, it's okay if you want to do something different. And now I'm not just talking about married or not married. I'm talking about, what is your career? What do you believe? How do you connect to God? All of those things, all of those big, giant topics. We're all so unique and individual. And I always think my work tends to get really spiritual because I think that self-discovery is really spiritual. But I tend to think that we're all a part of God and we're all co-creating with God, if I could say it that way. And if I'm co-creating something that somebody else has already done, am I really being the creation, so to speak, the dream, so to speak, that I'm here to be, whatever that might be? So I don't know if I answered your question. All of these things can take me into a million directions.
No, it's great. It's great. I want to come back to this self-discovery being spiritual, but before we do that, when you started making some of these decisions for yourself and you started thinking for yourself, you started maybe paying attention to the things that you were thinking, feeling, believing, and accepting that those were okay. How did it feel to start making some of these decisions that went against this script or went against some of maybe the beliefs of people around you? How did that feel?
I would say liberating and terrifying at the same time because because it's liberating because you feel like, wow, I'm really doing like what I want to do. I'm really connected to me. And I'm not just living from the top down, meaning my mind is controlling everything. I'm paying attention to where I'm pulled, to where things inspire me. And I'm going toward things that I want to learn more about. So in that sense, very liberating. And in that sense, I don't care what anybody else has to say. I know what this feels like to me, but terrifying because particularly if you're a sensitive person like me, you know when people are just giving you mouth service of support versus when they really support you. And there are always times when people are going to say they support you, but you can kind of feel like they really think you're going down the wrong path. And then there's going to be the people that flat out question you. Like, what are you doing? When I wanted to switch careers, my parents didn't understand why I would want to leave this secure job and go do something and start over. I mean, I was only 20. Well, I was 28 by the time I went back to school, but I was still so young. Like, why wouldn't I not want to start over? So it's terrifying and liberating all at the same time.
How do you differentiate between real support and maybe surface level support?
It's a good question. I think it's a felt sense. I think there's a feeling that happens when you're talking to somebody and you know that they don't really understand why you're doing it. They're saying, "Oh, that's good," but I think it's a feeling. I think it just doesn't quite meet. It's not quite aligned. It feels hollow, if I could say it that way. And not that they aren't happy for you, but they just don't get why you would do this or what you would do. Versus real support is, this is so awesome. I'm glad you're following what you want to do. I don't know that I have a specific definition of how I differentiate. I've never actually thought about that question. I think real support will ask me lots of questions, not questioning me, but is curious about why I want to do this. And not, why would you want to do this? But, oh, tell me why. What draws you to this? Like, what lights you up about this? How did this come about? That's so great that you're following your own path. That's so great that you're following things that seem to speak to you and pull you. it's not all just, well, this doesn't make sense. This isn't logical. You're not going in the order. Why would you start? It's a curiosity. It's a questions of curiosity versus question of questioning your decisions. I think that's one big piece.
Well, I've felt that a lot in my life. To me, real support just looks like someone genuinely wanting to understand and to see you and to be curious. And I've had times I've chosen to go against the script, so to speak, and I've taken some very interesting paths in my life. And
Bravo.
I've struggled at times with, sometimes I've made assumptions that people don't support me based on maybe just some of their actions or comments or lack of curiosity. Sometimes I've actually found that to end up being false, in that I was making a lot of assumptions that I thought this person didn't support me or believe in me. And later on, I came to find that, well, actually, it wasn't really true at all. But I'm with you in that questioning in a just genuinely curious way, in a seeking to understand, hey, why are you making these decisions? And why is this important to you? That feels like a really meaningful version of support to me.
Yes, I agree completely. And I've also had the same experiences where I make assumptions. And that leads me to say, when I listen to you to describe it, when somebody really witnesses me versus when somebody shames me, when somebody really witnesses me, they're trusting me. Julie's on her path. She's figuring out, they're trusting that I'm going to figure it out, so to speak, versus when they're questioning me. But the piece that I want to hone in on is when we have assumptions that aren't necessarily true. My perspective on that is I don't really need to worry about whether or not my assumption is true. If I'm feeling that way, now I have to witness myself. What am I witnessing when I feel that way? Well, I'm witnessing, for me anyway, I'm witnessing this feeling of not belonging, this feeling of not fitting in, this feeling of not being understood, the feeling of being alone. And so when I feel like somebody else is not able to witness me, and even if I'm assuming that they disagree with me and I'm wrong, it doesn't matter whether I'm wrong or not, in the sense of your own self-discovery of, I'm having this experience and now I'm going to trust my assumptions, in the sense that, not about the other person, in the sense that something in me still needs to be witnessed by me. And so I'm feeling lonely. I feel like I don't belong. I feel like I don't fit in. I mean, those parts are the really hard parts of carving your own path that goes against the mainstream grain, is there are a lot of moments where you feel totally alone and even despair. And then there's other moments where you feel total bliss, because it's like, oh, this is so exciting. And then the next hour, you're like, oh my God, how am I ever going to make this happen? Nobody understands me. Everybody thinks I'm wacko or whatever. But that inner witnessing is a big piece, because when we're in relationships where we feel like, even our closest relationships, there are going to be times where we feel like the other person doesn't get us. And that may or may not be true. But now I have to figure out, how do I witness me? How do I trust those feelings? Not because they're true about the other person, but there's something in me that needs attention and care and to be seen by me. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, this is something that I've heard you share a lot about. It's this idea of embracing, accepting the range of emotions and feelings that we might experience on a day-to-day basis in our lives, and bringing some curiosity towards them. Tell me more about that, especially some of these more difficult feelings, like maybe it's anger or it's jealousy, or it's some of these feelings that we tend to label as, I'm putting up air quotes, bad feelings or negative feelings. It sounds like you're saying there's an opportunity for us to take a look inside and to learn more about ourselves when these feelings come up. Tell me more about that.
Yes, there are so many things I could say about this. Every feeling could tell us more about even our power. So let's just take one. Let's take anger, for example. We live in the society of anger management. And I understand that there's a value in that. But what I don't like about it is that that my feelings need to be managed instead of cared for. Usually when people are angry, they have a really good reason for being angry. And I'm talking about the feeling, not the behavior of how I might, I'm not suggesting that violence is right. I'm not saying you get to do whatever you want because you feel angry and you don't have to worry about how it impacts other people. I'm not talking about that. But that witnessing, instead of making myself wrong or bad for feeling angry, how do I trust myself? Which means I'm going to ask questions like, okay, why am I so angry? I'm so angry because of this. And I'm going to go further because a lot of times anger is showing us our power. Anger is showing us where we need to draw boundaries. Anger is showing us where we might need to walk away from something. And for women, we get marginalized a lot when we express it. For men, it could be a strength. That man is strong when he expresses anger. For a woman, she's too emotional. These are some of the stories that play out. So if I get angry and I make myself wrong because of that, and I try to hurry up and not make myself angry, I am missing the consciousness in me that is trying to emerge, that is trying to guide me and say, no, I've had enough of this, or I need to speak up for myself about this, or I need to go draw a boundary about this, that my anger isn't wrong. It needs my attention. It needs my awareness so that it can teach me about my own power, about my own voice, about the boundaries that I might need to draw. It could even, I could say, where do I feel this anger in my body? And then we could bring the body's intelligence into it. So there are all sorts of ways that when we stop, I brought up body, and now I'm thinking about how our bodies immediately tense when we feel a certain feeling or emotion that we don't want to feel. It's like we put up a wall because we have been taught that these things are bad, when these things are actually very important pieces of us that are informing. So learning how to even notice my body just tensed up. Okay, oh, look, how do I relax into this? It's okay. I'm angry. That's okay. What am I angry about? And sometimes I might need to even yell and scream by myself because I have to move it through me. So anger is a really big one, but certainly applies to sadness and jealousy. And, oh, it's wrong to be jealous. It's wrong to be judgmental. Well, sometimes those things, maybe I'm jealous because I want something like that. Maybe I should pay attention to that jealousy and not just make myself bad for feeling it. Maybe I need to ask myself, oh, well, what do I want? And can I start to do things to reach that? And then judgment. It's the same thing. If I feel judgmental, I don't have to devalue the person. I don't have to make the person bad. But maybe that means that this person is not for me. It doesn't mean that person's a less valuable human being, but we need our judgment. So stuff like that.
Take us more down the path of if someone's listening to this and they have that relationship with some of these more difficult emotions. They have this relationship that anger is not okay, jealousy is not okay. These are things that I'm not supposed to feel. How do we actually start to change or develop that relationship with these feelings? How do we start this learning process of diving into what these emotions are trying to teach us? How do we actually do that?
I want to say something about that. I want to be careful about I want to make sure I'm not implying that this emotion is here because there's some teaching that I need to learn. This is going to sound really paradoxical because sometimes the teaching that I need to learn is simply tenderness around the emotion. It doesn't mean there's some grand message that needs to happen, although that can happen. So I want to be careful that because that can make people go into, well, what's the meaning of this? Sometimes the meaning is just love, my own tenderness and love. But how can we do that? I think there's lots of ways, but one of the things that comes to mind is first of all, beginning to notice our resistance to it. Because I think we're so trained to not feel that when we have that resistance, we don't think there's anything wrong with that. We think that that's how we're supposed to handle these things. We're not supposed to feel this. It's healthier to not feel this. If I feel this, it means I'm less healthy. I'm less normal. I'm less together. So watching our reactions to those feelings would be step one, learning to recognize when I say, oh, I'm so messed up because I feel this. Or, oh, I can't feel that because that would mean X, Y, Z. So number one, the recognition of all of the ways we turn away from those feelings. That's the first part, and that's like half the battle. Then the second part is, okay, I'm noticing that I feel this, like I feel this anger. And instead of trying to talk myself out of it, because that's what we do, I'm going to ask myself, I'm sure you have a good reason for this. What's going on? And for me, writing with those questions is a big thing, and let yourself, don't worry if you're right or wrong, if your anger is valid or not, if the other person's wrong or not. This is for you to experience first. And if I just talk myself out of it, I never get to the deepening that is so important. So asking questions, for some people, I notice that I'm sad. Well, instead of going to distract myself with whatever I might distract myself with, I might say, wow, I'm feeling sad. I know this sounds so simple, but yeah, I'm feeling sad. What am I sad about? And maybe I let myself cry instead of trying not to cry. Crying is such a regulating activity. And we put so much pressure on ourselves to keep it all in. And that in and of itself is part of what can be hurting us. So letting myself cry and cry more and weep and cry for hours and cry for days and cry for months and cry for years if you need to. Have a crying practice where I let myself cry. So allowing myself to let it come further out instead of, oh, I feel this. No, I can't feel that. And that's 2 examples.
Okay, so what about if we flip this and
Okay.
we talk a lot about these what we label negative emotions or difficult emotions, anger management. We've got to be able to manage our anger, these difficult emotions. How come there's no happiness management? How come there's no joy management? And we're not taught to manage those things. And those things are much more acceptable. Those are the feelings that we're supposed to feel, we want to feel. Does this same idea of curiosity and trying to learn, does that apply to positive emotions?
Absolutely. I wish we would spend as much time asking ourselves, what does this happiness feel like right now? Or what just made me happy? As soon as we feel sad, we want to start to analyze it because it means there's a problem that I need to analyze and excavate. I need to get rid of. When we feel happy, we're just so in the moment. We're not even asking ourselves those questions. Now, I'd like to take that being in the moment and apply it to the negative feelings and say, I'm sad. How can I just be in this moment? But then also on the flip side, if I ask people, well, what makes you happy? They can tell me so easily, right? They don't need to spend a lot of time. They might not be able to tell me exactly what it feels like in their body until they spend a minute or 2 reflecting on that. But it feels expansive. It feels, things don't hurt as much as all these things. So I think we can do that. But I think the more important thing is when we're happy, we're so in the moment. When we feel joy, we're so in the moment. How do we learn to practice that being in the moment with these negative feelings and say, these feelings deserve as much respect as the happiness feelings, as the joy feeling. Now, the real paradox is this. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day who was talking about crying and how he was just like weeping about something. And he said, I felt so free. And I said, this is the thing I have such trouble explaining to people when I talk about feel your emotions. And people are like, what do you mean feel my emotions? I can't not. I'm trying not to feel them. All I do is feel them. Well, I want you to feel them with awareness and feel them with curiosity. Because usually when we're feeling them only from the place of I can't get rid of it. And I have a lot of compassion for that position. I know that there's a lot of struggle and suffering in that. But my friend was telling me this, and I said, exactly. Some of the moments when I have wept and when I have watched people I work with weep or even express their anger, they are so connected to themselves in those moments. And he said, Julie, I felt this liberation. I said, for me, yes, there's that, but I also feel this joy in the middle of it. I feel so at peace, and I'm like weeping sad. But I'm saying, I'm watching myself do it in a way. I've created this witness. I've built this witness in me that can look at myself and say, wow, you're really sad. What's going on? And a lot of times that might bring up weeping. I mean, if you're alive in the world today, there are lots of things to weep about. And when you're in that place, it's like you touch something where everything's okay. And that's the part that feels sacred and spiritual to me. So I wish we would take the so in the moment skill that we have when we're experiencing happiness and joy and apply it to the ones that we try not to experience and say, okay, I can be in this moment. When we learn that we have the ability to sit in those moments, we realize how strong and resilient we really are. And it doesn't come from because I overcame it, meaning I railroaded over it. It means that I sat in it and I let it move me. And I let the things in me that really want to be expressed come out, which means I've let more of me be alive. And there's a joy in that that I can't quite ever explain. It's an experience. It's can't, the words don't quite capture it.
That was very beautifully said. That is a version of self-expression, right? That is personal development. That is learning about ourselves, is
Right.
learning about all parts of ourselves and allowing all of that to exist and to be seen.
Yes.
That's a really powerful concept.
I can't shake my head big enough to that. Yes, I think that's what we don't understand. I know I didn't understand that these are parts of me that are here to help me express myself. But we live in such a culture that says, don't show these parts, only show these parts. Only show the parts of you that are doing it right. And I'm using the air quotes because, like, what does that mean? But when I show the parts of me that are in pain, and right now, I don't mean show them to other people, although that might come. I mean show them to myself. When I can say, okay, yeah, this pain is allowed. I am saying I am allowed. When I say this pain is not allowed, I am sending a part of me away. And that, for a lot of people, originates in different traumas, for sure. And that could have saved somebody's life at that time. But it also comes from our culture that shows images of health and happiness that are very, very rigid. And in my opinion, very, very harmful because we compare ourselves to those images. And if we don't fit, we think it means that something's wrong with us. And that means I'm taking parts of me and saying, you are not okay. You need to go away. I'm sending parts of me away, parts that have very important things to express. Yes, I am expressing myself. We don't realize that when I am sad, when I'm angry, I'm expressing myself. I want to allow that expression. I don't want to oppress it. There's enough oppression in the world. I don't need to do it inside of me too, but that's what happens. We internalize all this stuff that we see. And it's not any fault of our own, but it is something that we could grow our awareness around and start to do a little differently. I can work on my inner oppressor or my inner torturer, as I call mine.
Because what ends up becoming some of the consequence of if we internalize these things and we do that over a period of time and we don't allow ourselves to actually express these feelings that we have, to express ourselves, what's the consequence of that?
I think the consequence is different for everybody. Individual consequences are going to be different, but for many people, maybe it brings up consequences in my relationships where I am convincing myself to express to accept harmful behavior because I don't feel like it's right for me to express my anger. It could be relationship consequences like that. Certainly can be body consequences. I have lots of body symptoms that I'm always working with. And you can go the conventional route for sure. I see doctors and do that, but that's all fine. But there's always more. There's more going on. There's a dreaming or a creativity that's trying to come to life. So for me, I feel it in my body. My body has become one of my biggest allies in helping me pay attention to maybe an emotion that I'm trying to ignore. And I don't even realize I'm doing it because I'm so used to doing it. So when my body hurts, I've learned to practice noticing it. And I want to close my eyes immediately because I do that a lot. I want to say, okay, body, you're hurting and your pain is welcomed here. That's the first thing, right? Your pain is welcome here. Tell me about your hurting. And I almost want to say it like this. We live in such a diagnostic, pathologizing culture. We're so used to what's wrong with my body. Oh, something's wrong. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. If you need care, get it. Absolutely get it. But we also want to say, what is possibly right about what's happening in my body? You know, my shoulder is burning. I want to feel into that burn and get to know it better. I want to imitate it. And these are, exercises that I teach in my classes. And I don't know how much to go into them here, but when I'm doing this on my own, I start to imitate it. What does the stabbing pain in my shoulder feel like? And I'll start to, a lot of people, if I ask them to imitate it, will start to go, feels like somebody's stabbing me in my back. And they will automatically start to do a motion that imitates it. And I want to talk to that hand. Well, what is that hand's got? Really strong expression coming out of it right now. And I'm trying not to hit my desk because of our microphones, but I want to pound on my desk. And all of a sudden, I'm angry. I didn't realize I was trying so hard to not be bothered by this issue. And it's like my body starts feeling it for me. And if I take my body's cue and say, oh, you're hurting. Other times I used to get really bad migraine pressure headaches. I happily, knock on something, do not get them nearly as often. It's much more rare. And I remember one time coming home and after spending the day of, trying to concentrate and trying to make it go away and trying to get rid of it, I came home, dark room, because I needed a dark room. And I remember just letting my body express itself, which sounded like this. It hurts so bad. It hurts so bad. It hurts so bad. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. And I just started bawling. And in that moment, I didn't exactly know why I was bawling, but I just let myself bawl and I felt better.
As you were sharing all that, it gave me chills, because you were talking about this relationship of the emotions that we feel and how they show up in our body. And I recently had a conversation on the show with a woman named Martha Arnett. And during our conversation, she actually led me through the practice that she would lead her clients through, where she had me, similar to as you were just talking about, she had me close my eyes and start to think, sharing with her, I deal with a lot of chronic shoulder pain, neck pain. And she had me close my eyes and actually led me through the process of really feeling into that pain. And her, sort of practice was to give it some kind of a shape and a color, and just to label it and to be curious and say, hey, what are you here for? What are you trying to teach me? And to listen and to almost, create this relationship with the pain and the sensation that we were feeling in our bodies. And so I had chills as you were saying all of that, because it just reminded me of that conversation and how that's just not something that we're taught. We're not taught how or why to develop a relationship with the pain or sensations that we're feeling. And I think we're missing out on a lot of what our bodies could be telling us.
Absolutely. I mean, and what you're saying is exactly why I started teaching these classes. There's so much I wish we would have learned in grade school, but there's so much information that we have access to that we don't even realize we have access to, because we are taught to power through. We are taught that our bodies are machines and that our minds can shape them. And maybe that's true in lots of respects. But if we are never going the other way, where we're letting the body inform our minds, then we're missing out on lots of intelligence and, in many cases, lots of relief for people. I have come to, in my classes, I talk about, we're taught that we are, from a spiritual perspective, or I should say religious perspective, we're taught that we're not our bodies, that we shouldn't trust our bodies, that our bodies are the seat of sin. And we very much are our bodies. We might not be only our bodies, but when I put my hands on my chest and I say to myself, this is my body, that is a spiritual experience, because I have spent so much time trying to change my body, trying to escape feelings of my body. But when I hold on to myself and say, this is my body, this is me, that's a beautiful religious experience for me. And I have started to say, my body is my baby. When people have children, and I don't have children, I have a dog, she's my child. But when we see images of babies and a baby crying or a baby is uncomfortable and the baby lets us know that, free expression. The baby has not been programmed with all the rules that we've been programmed with. So if I say, oh yeah, you can't show that part of yourself to a baby, whatever. So the baby's just reacting. And the adults are trying to figure out how to soothe, how to ease the baby. Well, somewhere along the line, we lose the idea that we are still that baby. We're not an infant, but our bodies still like comfort. Babies love, those chairs that vibrate, and you hear people talk about taking a baby in a car to calm the baby down. Vibration is a huge soothing thing for me. When I let my body shake and vibrate, it is so soothing rather than trying to make my body stiff and look this way all the time and sit up straight and do this, all these things. I've learned to look at my body as my baby in the sense that when it feels something, I hope that I am treating it the way I would a baby that I thought was in pain, or the way that I do to my dog when I think something's wrong with her. And that sounds like my dog, oh, sweetie, is something hurt? Come here. Come tell me about it. Let me see if I can figure out how to soothe you. That got lost somewhere where it wasn't about soothing ourselves. It was about fixing ourselves, which is a different energy completely. So yes, the body, when we can learn how to welcome its experiences, how to invite it to express itself more, has so much to teach us and is a true ally on the whole journey.
Okay, so why, not that you have the answer to this, but I'm just curious of your perspective. Why, from a societal standpoint, why do I have to go 29 years of my life before I finally learn about some of this stuff? Why is it that in school we're taught very certain things, and some of these things about understanding my emotions and how to relate to them and how to be curious and how trauma and things show up in my body? I'm 29 and I feel like I'm blessed to be learning this at this point in my life, because I feel like many people go maybe their whole entire lives without learning some of these things that we're talking about today. Why is that?
I am sure there are many reasons, but the first one that comes to my mind is that we live in a very patriarchal society. And in a patriarchal society, we revere the masculine and we marginalize the feminine. Now, let me make something clear. I am talking about male and female, but I want to go deeper into masculine and feminine, because we all have masculine parts of us and feminine parts of us. And we live in a culture that made things like strength mean that I was manly. I didn't get into emotions, right? So this is like the culture that we grew up in. I don't know why it happened this way, but somewhere along the line, and it goes way back, people thought it was necessary to make not showing emotions, not feeling emotions strong. And feeling emotions and being in our emotions was considered a weakness. And so we made manliness about not feeling. And in doing so, we not only marginalized females, but we marginalized the feminine in all of us. And the feminine is the part of us that is strong in a different way, is nurturing, is more caring, also very strong. But we made that not strong. We made that's somebody else's role. And what happens is we all then start to internalize the patriarchy, where it says, oh no, that's weakness. Don't do that. And we have like this inner patriarchy that decides what is more strong. I'm going to keep using the word strong. So that's like a huge part of it. I mean, and then you see that in lots of ways of men in positions of power, whether it's in churches, whether it's in society. We're starting to see that change, but all of that got, we got fertilized, so to speak, with all of that. And then even I remember reading, there's a book called Quiet, and that's another thing that gets marginalized. The boisterous, loud person is the one that's the good leader. The quiet person is marginalized. And now we're seeing wonderful research come out about that. But in that book, Susan Cain, the author, talked about the Dale Carnegie era and how it was the era of personality. And there was a correlation of an uptick in anxiety medicine too, because you were basically being taught to stand in front of a room and be this certain personality, because that's what sells and that's what people trust and that's what success is. And if that didn't come naturally to you, you were not letting your real self have any expression, right? So this is, I'm sure there are lots of answers to that question, but this is one area that I popped in my mind as soon as you talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, as you think about from a societal standpoint, and I think about the types of personalities or traits or characteristics or different things that are traditionally celebrated and more accepted. And I know that was a lot of, my experience in story is that I've talked about it on recent episodes, but I felt like when I thought with my brain and I thought logically, good things happened to me. I got good grades and I was celebrated for that. And that transitioned into my professional career. And if I were to act a certain way, and for me, that was very logical. I was doing a
Yes.
lot of thinking with my brain. That led to what I felt like were positive outcomes. And it led to a lot of the applause from people around me. And that feels good. And in that whole
Absolutely.
process, I felt like I lost a lot of touch with that more emotional side of me. And now it's this whole process of building that relationship back.
Oh, I have so much to say about that. Exactly. And me too. So logic is a masculine energy. Okay. And let me be clear. I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm not saying that masculine equals bad. We all have masculine and feminine energies. Logic is a masculine energy, and our culture reveres logic, things making sense, things going in order more than creativity, which is considered more of like a feminine energy. Okay. Well, just like you, when I got good grades and I got rewarded for getting A's or B's or whatever, for not failing. Well, then when I grow up and I apply that to my life, getting good grades, doing things in order, making sense, achieving, that all means success. Feeling, being sad, being distraught, all of those things, not success. That means, so logic, drive, all those things, that equals right, good. And these other things equal failure, wrong. And I don't just mean right. I mean, like, I am right as a human or I am wrong as a human. And it's very polarized. So, yes, I think the second, and you, like me, started learning this at a young age, because I do think there are many people who never learn this. And maybe that's okay on their journey. But it's like the second half of life is about reconnecting to all these other parts that we were taught to ignore for various reasons. We have our own individual stories of why too, but yeah.
I thought it was interesting that you said maybe that's okay on their journey, and I say that because I've caught myself before in my life as I go down certain paths and I start to explore certain things. I've applied the label that the path that I'm on is right, and if the people around me aren't on a similar path, that is wrong. To give a very specific example, I started my career working at General Motors, and then I decided that I wanted to explore the path of entrepreneurship. And
Yeah.
I thought that owning a business and being an entrepreneur, I very much thought that that was the right thing to do. And I admittedly looked down on some of my friends and people around me who were working corporate jobs, and I was kind of like, "Hey, you guys aren't doing it right. What I'm doing is
Right.
right." So I thought it
Right.
was interesting that you also said it's okay on their journey, meaning can it be okay, not right, not wrong, that someone, I don't know, I guess, can someone be going through their life's journey and maybe not have a great relationship with their body, or maybe they're not doing the kind of work that we're talking about? Can that be okay?
For them, maybe. And now, what do you mean by is that okay? In other words, for me, that would never be okay. But that's the path
Because
that's the path that's unfolded for me. I don't accept that. I reject that. It's totally not okay for my journey. I've tried to make myself go in order, and something always comes and pulls me out of order, so to speak. And what I've learned is that the thing that I think is pulling me out of order is pulling me toward me. But some people can live their life, everything, one thing follows the other. They get married, they grow up, they have kids, they get a job, they stay in that job, and they don't ever question it. Okay, that wouldn't work for me because for whatever reason, I question everything. And I could have stayed in the accounting world, but for me, I didn't have the meaning that I wanted. Now, for some people, their meaning comes from their career. For some people, their meaning comes from somewhere else. It could come from art or family. And of course, for some people, it comes from various places. But I couldn't sit in a cubicle for the rest of my life. I needed to be dealing with people and self-development and self-discovery. Other people can do that and have a great life and it works for them and great. But if it doesn't work for me, does that mean that I'm the one that's not doing it right because just following the order is what I'm supposed to do? Why would you make it so difficult? Right. So I don't know. That question is a very individual question. For me and you, no.
yeah. Well, I think that's exactly it. I feel like that's the conclusion that I sort of keep coming to, is that many questions in life are individual questions. I'm I'm with you on this side of things, in that I cannot imagine my life without this development, without this questioning, without this learning. And it's what fuels me. I know you've said it. This personal development journey is something that, in my mind, is my greatest work, and it will continue till the day that I am no longer on this earth. And that feels like my truth and my reality. And sometimes I still catch myself, if there's people in my life who aren't doing similar things, and yet they seem okay with it. I'm kind of like, it's just interesting. How come you don't feel this pull, or like, how come you seem to be okay? And that, whatever okay means, but I guess I resonate with, these are individual things that I guess we get the freedom to decide for ourselves what we are comfortable with, what we want to seek and pursue, and what we don't.
Exactly. And I'm with you. I look at other people sometimes and I think to myself, I've had the same like judgmental thoughts that you talked about having in the past. How, of course, I found the way, like
Yeah.
you should be doing it like me. Especially because I grew up in a religious culture that said this is the way. And then I broke out of that and assumed that I found the real way. But I just found my way. That's what I found. I found my way. I think the world would be a lot better if we let people find their way and not felt the need to tell people how they should be. So, and we all have to watch that. But yeah, I've questioned, how come these things don't, how can you be so just nonchalant about this? How are you not bothered by this? How can you not ask yourself, they're not me, they're them. And I'll question that till the day I die on occasion. But at the end of the day, it comes back to, they're not here to live my life. I am. And I'm not here to live their life. They are. And I might see things and think I am 100% certain that if they did this, that, they wouldn't have this struggle or whatever. But that's, first of all, I don't know that I'm right, but I can feel that passionately sometimes. But I don't want people to do that to me. So I try my best, because there are people that will look at me and say, if you only did this, this, and this, and give me some logical thing, then you wouldn't feel this, this, and this. Well, I disagree. I think feeling all our emotions is important. So yeah, they're them, I'm me, and that gets hard sometimes.
It does. I can definitely feel
Mm-hmm.
that. But it's been a lot of my intention behind this show and this podcast, is that I want to explore things that I find interesting. I want to explore things that maybe I agree with and I believe. I want to explore things that maybe I disagree with and I don't
Right.
believe. And I've said to people, in my life close to me, I have no expectation that you're going to listen to every episode of this podcast and that you're going to be on the same journey that I am. This is my way of exploring things that feel meaningful to me and having conversations that feel meaningful to me. And I hope that there are other people out there in the world that find these types of conversations interesting. I hope that there are people
Yes.
that are open to exploring. And I'm also not going to force it on people.
Right.
I don't force listening to the show. I don't force exploring these topics. And so I really appreciate that perspective of it. I think just being an individual journey that we're all on.
Right. We're all a dream trying to come true, if I could say it that way. And everybody's dream is a little bit different. And yeah, that's what's so hard about living in a culture that makes certain things right and certain things wrong, because you feel like you are wrong to go on a certain path. And yet here we live in a culture that has more freedom than some other cultures in some ways. So but yeah, I agree. I want to be brave enough to follow my own path and my own callings. And I might stop and wonder why somebody else is not doing it like me. But hopefully I don't get too caught up on that for too long, because then I'm not living my path.
Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to make sure that we came back to is
Yeah.
during our conversation you said you shared your belief that personal development is a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
It kind of goes in line with everything that we've been talking about. We all come up with ideas that come from all over the place about how we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to express and what we're not supposed to express. And when that happens, we're not whole. We're not fully who we are, because we're too busy pushing pieces of us away for various reasons. When I start to get to know myself, and for some people that doesn't even make sense. I know myself, right? And they might. But when I start to get to know all of me, my emotions, when I deeper my awareness of my experience of certain emotions, when I deeper my awareness of things that my body is expressing, I meet more of me. And it comes to a point, I was saying earlier that, there have been times when I've let myself weep or feel really angry when I touched this place that was totally safe, if I could say it that way, where I was whole and where it felt like I was connected to something way bigger than me, while at the same time being connected to something very deep inside of me. And to me, that's a spiritual experience. That the me that I can look at, that I can touch, that there's so much more of me than just those things. And when I tune into them, it seems to connect me to something also bigger than me. So I'm a big believer that my deepest me is God and your deepest you is God. Now, God is a controversial word because some people have different thoughts about what that means. And I know my thoughts about what that means have changed drastically over the last few decades. But when I get deeper and deeper into discovering who I am, I feel more connected to something bigger than me and something sacred. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually just having a conversation like this with my mom recently, and
Oh, really?
I was sharing with her some of those same things. That I'm with you in that there is a sense of, I'm not sure, peace or belonging in the thinking
Yes.
that this development journey that we're on, that I am a part of a larger, whatever you want to call it, but
Yeah.
I'm a piece of something larger, and that brings me a sense of peace, I think. Um,
Yes. And I can't access it. I mean, people access that in all sorts of different ways. Like we could look at a gorgeous sunset, and those awe-inspiring moments make us feel like that there's something bigger, that, it just kind of stops time when you're just totally taken over in wonder about this glorious scene that you don't know how exactly it happens, or a beautiful tree or a snowfall, all the, nature kinds of things that we look at. And some people connect that to the divine. That's all wonderful. What I have learned is that my suffering also connects me. Now, I don't mean I'm going to create suffering so I can be connected. I don't mean that. But that the suffering that I am going to experience in this life, when I learn how to witness it, I guess the best way that I would say it is I touch a love that seems infinite. And to me, that's, I guess, the cleanest definition of God, if I could come up with one, that there's a presence that is just this never ending fountain of love. And when I stop running from the things that cause me pain, and when I turn toward those things with love and awareness and care and attention, I don't know if I'm imitating God at that point, and that's why it feels that way, but I touch something way bigger than all of this stuff that we can see, and something that feels deeply expansive and sacred.
I just appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate this entire conversation. These are the types of conversations that I could have all day long. So thank you.
Me too.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for sharing some of your perspective. I mean, I've really, really enjoyed this. If people wanted to, if they've listened to this conversation, if they've enjoyed hearing from you, if they wanted to get in touch with you or follow you, what are some ways that they might be able to do that?
Well, first, I want to thank you too for such depth of questions. I could also do this all the time, and hopefully I will. But if people want to find me, my website is Booksh, BOOKSH.com. I have some free resources on there, lots of blogs, lots of interviews. And then I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and people can find me there just by using my name.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you. These conversations, they light me up. I enjoy exploring these topics, and so thank you for being willing to do that with me and for our audience.
Thank you, Chad. I really appreciate it as well.
My friends, thank you as always for tuning in. Did you enjoy the conversation? If you did, if you're sitting there thinking, wow, that was great, if you could just take a moment and leave a 5-star review, that'd be awesome. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you in advance. Of course, you can always connect with me and follow the show on social media at A Level Deeper Podcast, where we post clips from these episodes. And the link to the Patreon is in the comments, where you can support this podcast, support meaningful conversations like these on a deeper level. All right, that's it for this week, and we'll see you next time.